Well, it's tough to follow the governor and close not with the governor closing, but I'd be remiss not to take the last 25, 30 minutes of our time together, your time that you really committed to us, to yourselves, to our state, not to have a readout of really yesterday. We went on an experiment yesterday. We've never done this before at WEDC, and having three breakouts that happened 3 different times at the same time. So 3 different ones, they're all happening, and these guys led the same conversation with the same panel 3 times, but wildly with a whole new group of folks. And we'll hear a little bit about how those conversations were different based on who was in the room. But because we all weren't in each time they had that conversation, and it turned out that each of those conversations were just a little bit different. We wanted to bring this together, learn a little bit about our amazing facilitators' reflections on their respective panels, and then share at the end a little bit of what came across with our amazing tools of AI, what we saw that cross-cut the 3 sessions. And so I'm going to start with Olivia. Olivia, you led the breakout session on really figuring out how to unlock opportunity facing a fair amount of opposition, right? And really figure that out. So give us, for a minute, maybe ground us again, remind us what that was about, and what were your reflections? What did you hear yesterday?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, hello everyone. It's great to be here again for day 2 and to wrap up our summit here today. Yeah, I think one, just as kind of a big takeaway in what we discussed yesterday, just as a quick refresher, again, our topic was all about how to foster growth mindset in communities. We had 4 fantastic panelists who were with us who had very diverse communities and very diverse situations, and they provided some context into how they were able to navigate some of those challenges and what those conversations looked like in their own communities. And so it was really fun to be able to interact with them, interact with the audience. I want to give a huge shout out to all our audience members and participants. We had some great questions and just great interaction throughout the day. But again, overall, it was all about, how do we look at the future and how do we kind of pull together to make sure we continue to grow and prosper as a community. When I think about kind of what the key takeaways were, it was a lot of fun last night to kind of reflect and think back on how those conversations went. There were so many things that stuck out to me, but I think a few things that I wanted to touch on. One was that really there was this kind of underlying theme of the fact that communities need to grow or they're going to die. There's no such thing as kind of standing still. I know Jackie from 3 Lakes on our panel, she kind of coined the term toxic nostalgia, where some of our smaller communities especially, we maybe want to kind of always look back and think about the good old days, maybe in the 80s, 90s, whatever it is for each community. But that is not healthy, and that's not what's going to lead towards kind of a growth mindset. And so I think that was maybe one of the biggest underlying themes that we saw. But overall, I think hearing from each of those communities about ways that they've interacted and approached that, it was really inspiring to kind of see the different approaches that are out there to navigate those situations.
That's amazing. Michele, you are a leader at our Department of Workforce Development. You have your head in the workforce challenges and solutions on a daily basis, and yet you led a panel of our businesses, and 2 businesses, and then one of our really amazing cities that has their own employment, and then figuring out how to support the workforce of their businesses. Tell us about your panel, what your takeaways and reflections were.
What was interesting is our panel included a local farmer. We also had a regional manufacturer, Sachin from the aluminum foundry. Then we had this multinational agribusiness in JBS, and as you said, the city of Sturgeon Bay represented. But all of them, every single one of them just talked about it really does take a community and it takes collaboration. And they were clear about building a workforce requires that the messaging, that the communication within working with folks in the community, from state agencies to community-based organizations to technical colleges, that is essential because employers have to take a role. They are responsible for their communities and for their workers. You must invest in people, and I think we've heard that message over and over again. Some of the questions came to, what's the return on investment? How do you get it started? And who did you talk to? And that was, a lot of that, it really spoke to the initiative and the intentionality of each of those employers. And they just talked about, again, how some of the governor's resources, how the state resources, how WEDC and others really could contribute to that. So that was huge. Another part of it was about proactive messaging. So as employers, when they get out there in the community, they really do have to really kind of put their value proposition out there, because it has to be clear what they do. Like, for example, the aluminum foundry, people think of that as a dirty business, and no, I'm not really interested in that. The farmer who said, you know, they don't really understand what it takes, but getting out in the community, explaining, this is what we do, this is what we look like. You want to come in, you know, inviting folks in, that's how you really build. One, that helps you encourage the youth, because then they can say, oh, this is something I might be interested in. It also encourages, right, the investment, that two-way conversation that really moves the needle, that means investment. And lastly, they really talked about, look, AI, employers have to be clear about what AI is. Is it a job killer? Is it a job creator? Or is it something that they're going to use to really encourage folks who are already there to do more, right? To say, we can upskill you because you can contribute to what we want to do as we automate or build in technology, because it's only experienced folks like their current workforce that's really going to get them there. And so that was, I think that messaging was really solid, and it was, and all of them said that. But again, it took an amazing panel. And I think it kind of came out that, you know, AI, and I think we've all maybe heard this phrase, is AI going to take our jobs? No, realistically, AI is going to require people who use AI, so that openness, and to say, we're growing as a company, and we know you can grow with us. So that was a huge element
Just to pull a couple of things together that you talked about. The openness, the open-mindedness of folks that need to find other human beings to make their business go. I mean, it started with Sachin thinking about checking any of his biases at the door when a company like his begins bringing on women who are not in the workforce. You had Dan Trutman, who's bringing on critical workers from Nicaragua. And Sabrina from JBS, right? Working with nonprofits to figure out, well, there's this incredible workforce. They're bringing in folks that weren't originally from this country, maybe don't speak English. And so you tying that together with being an openness of the next new thing, AI, right? That our employers and maybe are some of the most open-minded folks you might meet in Wisconsin.
Exactly. And I would say lastly, the thing that may sound controversial to folks is they said immigration is absolutely critical to their success. Everybody, it was echoed across the board for the employers.
So interesting.
Immigration critical.
All right. And Shayna, over to you.
I was a little nervous about repeating the conversation 3 different times, and I had so much fun, and the only downfall is I didn't get to sit in on these amazing panels. And the themes, even though we had very different topics, you know, we were talking about venture capital and unlocking the ecosystem that supports startups, our dreamers and our doers, our builders and our backers, but the themes are almost the same that I just heard Olivia and Michele talk about. We talked about Wisconsin being a little behind on where we have potential. And the panel, the conversation was very different, each of them. The session, we talked about all sorts of different things. But the underlying competitive advantage was collaboration across the state, really using that as a differentiator for the state of Wisconsin. And instead of trying to build another Silicon Valley, where we don't have a competitive advantage in Silicon or billions of available capital assets, let's build the best Green Bay we can. Let's build the best Madison we can. And the stronger Madison gets and is connected to Green Bay, the stronger Green Bay gets. And how do we build that as not just a marketing campaign, but as a mindset, as a habit? And I think maybe some of you, that was maybe your first time like hearing it directly from the venture capital investors in Wisconsin. And what I heard loud and clear was just as much as you want capital in your community, they want you to source their deals for them. They need you to raise your hand and say, this is where we in our region have the right to win. This is where you should be looking for your supply chain, for your workforce, for your business mentors, because we are exceptional at these three things. So how do we rely on the power of this network of this room to identify what those niche things are and build the strongest Wisconsin we can, because we have so much unmet potential here in this state. And I think sometimes we fall into, and Dana Guthrie was a former collegiate athlete. That's how she came to Wisconsin. She used a athletic metaphor, which I love. So she talked about how sometimes we get caught up in, do you support a legacy company or a startup company? Do you support a metro or a rural community? And sometimes when resources are scarce, you feel like those are forced choices. And maybe we have, in a room like this, we have productive dissent, we have collective debate, but when we leave this room, when we leave our locker room and step out onto the court, and after the game, when we do our press interviews, we're not Team Green Bay, we're not Team Legacy Company, we are Team Wisconsin. And that's gonna help high growth, that's gonna help our legacy companies, it's gonna help our workforce with AI skills in a manufacturing plant that then jumps into a startup that then comes back to lead a village community in government. All of it is connected, and we need everyone to kind of lock arms and commit to innovation. It's a full-on mindset, it's not a sector. Innovation is everyone's job, and it's a fun journey that we can do together. So I'm just super jazzed about what we were able to talk about.
We can tell. It's fantastic.
Sorry, it might have been the 3 cups of coffee.
No, it's great. We took the transcripts and other feedback we had. We had folks in every room taking notes, capturing what was heard in the different sessions. And with the wonderful tools we have, aided by artificial intelligence, we were able to see what were the cross-cutting themes. And this first theme, I know it. I was able to sit through almost every one of them, most of them. I heard it loudest and clearest from the mayor of Port Washington, but it turned out this theme cut across all 3 of our breakout sessions. I'm going to first ask you to respond to it, Olivia. I'm so interested to hear how this came up in the other panels, and this was courageous transparency. The communities expect honesty and not perfection. So Olivia, put that in your panel. Tell us what that meant, and then think about that, please, how you heard that.
Yeah, I think that was such a great comment, and I agree. My job, I felt like, was pretty easy because I had such dynamic panelists and speakers, and Ted Knightsky, the mayor of Port Washington, was definitely one of them. I think that comment about, courageous transparency was an absolutely key theme in our discussion. Obviously, we were talking about some pretty controversial projects where people really have opinions one way or the other on whether or not certain projects like data centers or housing or just a cultural shift are good for the community and what the people want. And so because of that context and because of that setting with what our speakers were talking about, that theme of needing to be transparent, even when it's difficult, even when you know you're going to receive pushback, came up time and time again. And I think as community leaders, that is something that really inspired me, and I hope inspired people in the room and those who were able to listen to the panel. Because even though it's maybe not the easiest conversation to have with your constituents, needing to be transparent up front and right away was absolutely crucial. And I think lastly, the last thing I'll just say here is that really where that transparency comes from is all of our panelists really recommended that our community members build relationships before it's necessary. And so instead of trying to advocate for your project in the middle of the project, you should really try to kind of look at things ahead of time, kind of 10, 15 years out, looking at your strategic plan and kind of building from there. And that way, when you do have the Charlie Barons of the world kind of throwing a bombshell into a community with a lot of different context and a lot of different media spotlights, you're prepared because you have those relationships built.
Yeah, jump in, either of you.
The courageous transparency for us, in our group, was mostly about the owners
Okay.
and employers and the HR really reaching out and talking to their people and being clear and understanding that if they needed help with childcare, transportation, even when on the immigration conversation about advocacy and who they could talk to about how to just help support the people that are on their team. So talking to them and them being open enough to tell them what's going on so they can be at work, so that they can understand what their career goals were so that
Yep.
they could grow in their companies.
I would say for courageous transparency, we talked about saying really clear, fast no's, which maybe is uncomfortable for Midwesterners and Wisconsinites. But when you have a startup founder that's trying to build something and everyone tells them that their pitch deck is really smart and great, but no one's funding them, you're sending them off in a direction. And so how do you give them quick no's and here's what would need to be true in order for it to fit with us? We're small, we're nice, but we can also say no.
Yeah. Shane, I'm going to come back to you because one of the cross-cutting themes I'm still trying to square with the panel that you led, which was this idea from nostalgia to narrative. And it was growth reframed as preservation of future opportunity. And so sometimes we don't want to, from nostalgia to narrative, from where we are, who we've been, and use that in our storytelling, where we're going. How does that fit with the startups and the funds that you talked to yesterday?
I think it's two things. One is the panel talked a lot about the history and legacy of companies in Wisconsin has come from widget makers, physical products that come through a line, you have a workforce, and you build a physical presence. And that's what our business leaders and generations of family-owned companies know. But the next gen of businesses are technology-based, maybe remote-first workforces. And so there's a mindset shift of you're a builder, they're a builder, you can seed the next generation, and it's okay that they don't look like what your company is. So that's one thing. And then the other piece of nostalgia that they hit on a little bit was making sure that what's our current top kind of profile of industry doesn't have us say, that's not for us, that's too out there. Like, how do we unlock our own mindsets to really dream big? You heard the Gilman superintendent talk about it doesn't cost you any more brain power to dream big than it does to dream small. And so I think that mindset of maybe the Wisconsin way is practicality and one step in front of the other. And that's great as long as you know if that step is meant to end in a Lambo leap or if it's just meant to get down the stage. And those require very different resources and very different mindsets.
Great.
And can I jump in
Yeah.
on that really quickly? I think that's so interesting that you said that. We really, in our conversation, weren't intentionally going this direction, but a theme that I also noticed was growing communities and communities with kind of a growth mindset definitely seemed to kind of be at the intersection between innovation and tradition. And so they found ways to kind of balance that tension between building on what was and really leaning towards the future. And so I think a lot of that comes from community leaders, but obviously is often led by our business community. So that's interesting to hear from the entrepreneurship and venture capital side of things as well.
The third cross-cutting theme and final that I want to dig into today, and Michele, I'm going to come to you first, but it's not just reflected in the businesses and other leaders we heard from yesterday. I think of other panelists yesterday, I think of so many folks in this room, the importance of resilient leadership and what that means. So talk to us a little bit about what resilient leadership felt like, was talked about, where it came through in the breakout session you led.
I would say that between JBS and Sachin, Sabrina from JBS and Sachin, they clearly conveyed their commitment to their workforce. They talked about hiring interpreters, that they had gone through some of them had even said they've even taken or driven people to work, provided transportation for people to make sure they can get there. So that resilient leadership says go above and beyond what your role perhaps says, but they just, it was their imperative. And I think one person did say it's their imperative, it's their responsibility. I think they just, it just really resonated, I think, with the group, where the group was saying, well, how can you afford it? And how do you know, what does that investment look like? What's that return on investment? And they were like, it pays in the retention that they have of their employees, the commitment that the folks have. And so it was, you could feel it in the room, and I think all the people who were in our room did see it and hear it from them.
Right. We're going to wrap this in just a minute, and I'm going to wrap it from this chair to talk a little bit about how inspired I am by the colleagues to my left, how inspired I am by the businesses and leaders that we've been able to convene here over the last couple of days. I'm inspired, I'm thinking about what Michele just talked about first, and we heard it in the last panel. We heard about talking about some of the global trade tensions. First of all, the realness that folks brought to this summit, and yet they still brought their optimism, which is maybe wonderfully Wisconsin, but also their resilience, and that's, I'm pretty inspired by that. I'm also really inspired by all of you in this audience. We, as I mentioned before, we were nervous about this breakout session. I thought that, man, folks are going to break out, get coffee, and get on their phones or go take some calls. I walked into every single session, walked by every single period. We had 3 periods in the day, 1, 2, and 3, and they were packed and people were wrapped with attention. And today and yesterday, I look back from up in the front table, and folks really were leaning in the whole day to the content here and the leaders that were here. And so thank you for that. And while I'm on the thanks, I want to really give a big thanks to the WEDC team. There is a commitment of the colleagues I get to work with at WEDC on 2 things, and that's both to the excellence of our work. And so to all of you who are still here, thank you for that commitment. And also thank you to the commitment to our shared mission of building a shared an economy that's really shared by all, where all really have the opportunity to thrive. And finally, I'm inspired, really, I didn't think this was going to be here, but maybe today especially, I'm inspired by Wisconsin, not the Wisconsin Badger football team, no. I am inspired by Wisconsin. I am inspired by our businesses, our economic developers. I'm inspired by our youth. I'm inspired by our businesses who are navigating a very uncertain global world right now. And so just thank you for being here. Thank you for being a source of my inspiration. And I look forward to continuing our work together. Thank you.